His help and ask for guidance. We seek refuge in Allah from the evil of ourselves and the consequence of our wrong actions. وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له له الملك وله الحمد وهو على كل شيء قدير وأشهد أن سيدنا وعظيمنا وحبيبنا وقائدنا وقرة أعيننا محمدا عبده ورسوله وصفيه وحبيبه وخليله اللهم صل وسلم عليه أما بعد إني أوصيكم بنفسي ونفسي بتقوى الله. To proceed, I remind myself and you all of the importance of taqwa of Allah, that is reverential consciousness of Allah. قال الله تعالى يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. Allah says, believers have taqwa of Allah with the taqwa due to Him and do not die except as Muslims. وقال تعالى يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. Allah says, believers have taqwa of Allah and speak words which hit the mark. He will put your actions right for you and forgive you your wrong deeds. All who obey Allah and His Messenger have won a mighty victory. Alhamdulillah, in the short time that we have, I want to attempt to address an issue or a subject that relates to the essence of our religion, that relates to the soul of Islam. And what is that topic, what is that subject? Is that is the discussion of sincerity or ikhlas. And as one of the greatest scholars, Ibn Ata'Allah, he said about sincerity, he said, Al-a'malu suwarun qa'imatun. Is that actions are like lifeless forms. They're like lifeless forms. وَأَرْوَاهُهَا وُجُودَ السِّرِّ الْإِخْلَاصِ فِيهَا. But it's the presence of the inner reality of sincerity within them that endows these forms with life-giving spirit. Is that what gives our Islam, what gives our actions, what gives everything that we do its spirit, its life, its essence, is the presence of ikhlas, of sincerity. And what is sincerity? What is, we hear these words a lot, ikhlas and taqwa, we have to really understand what these words mean. We shouldn't just say them unconsciously. What is sincerity? What is ikhlas? Is that etymologically speaking, it comes from a word akhlasa. The verb akhlasa shay is to remove the impurities of something, to make it khalis. Khalis means clean and pure and completely embellished. And the idea behind this is that our intentions have to be purified from impure ones. Is that all incorrect intentions and all alternative motives is that we have to make them pure we have to make them purified until they become correct intentions and correct motives. And it's also interesting to note that the English word sincerity comes from the Latin word sincerus, which also means to be clean and pure. And the Latin word comes from two words, sin, which is one, and crescere, which is to grow. And the idea is that it has one growth, it grows from one place and it's not mixed and adulterated. So even in English, this concept of sincerity has to do with purity and unadulterated motives and unmixed intentions. And what are the scholars, what's the definition, a more technical definition of ikhlas, of sincerity? Is that, according to Imam Ibn Abdul Salam, he says, al-ikhlas ay yaf'al al-mukallaf ta'a khalisatan lillahi wahda. Is that the individual performs acts of worship solely for the sake of Allah. No other motive except for the sake of Allah. لا يريد بها تعظيما من الناس. Is that he doesn't want to be honored by people. ولا توقيرا. He doesn't want to be respected by people by those acts of worship, that people should say that he's a righteous person, so on and so forth. ولا جلب نفع ديني. And that he doesn't want any benefit, any worldly benefit, وَلَا دَفْرُ ضَرْ دُنْيَوِي, and that he's not doing it just to save himself from a situation that's to Him. Another definition of ikhlas is that the scholars, they said, أن يقصد بما يفعله وجه الله متعريا عن التفات إلى غيره. Is that a person seeks by their action the countenance of Allah. They're seeking the good pleasure of Allah, and they're not turning towards the creation. Is that they're completely not turning towards the creation. And that's why, again, ikhlas is all about sincerity and turning towards Allah without any ulterior motives. And ikhlas, it has different degrees. There's different degrees of sincerity, there's different degrees of ikhlas. And the first and most important degree of ikhlas, of sincerity, is that the ikhlas and sincerity of our faith, and of our iman, and of our creed. So the idea is that ikhlas has to do with purification, with purity, is that if someone has mistaken beliefs, or someone has false beliefs, then the idea is that their belief system is adulterated with beliefs that are not acceptable and are not true. And that's why when the pagan Muslims, they came to the Prophet ﷺ and they posed this question. They came to the Prophet ﷺ and they said, tell us about Allah, give us the genealogy of Allah. Who's his father? What is he like? Right? They didn't have correct understanding. They didn't have that ikhlas in their iman. They had erroneous beliefs. So they asked this question to the Prophet ﷺ, tell us about the genealogy of Allah. And the Prophet ﷺ, he waited, and then what was revealed? Surah al-Ikhlas, the chapter of Ikhlas, which deals with the unity and the correct understanding of who Allah is. Lam yalid wa lam yulad, is that He wasn't begotten nor does He beget. Is that came down, and that was, it's called Surah al-Ikhlas because it deals with the purity and the right beliefs and aqidas, parts of faith. And that's why, again, when we say the shahada and we declare the truth of the shahada, is that, what is that called? That's also called, another name for it is kalimatul ikhlas. It's that statement of ikhlas, of sincerity or purity. So the first degree of ikhlas relates to a person's belief systems and relates to a person's, what their iman and their faith. We have to have purity in faith. And this doesn't just pertain to non-Muslims, but somebody might be Muslim, and if they're not conscious, they might have some understanding of Allah. That's not valid. That's not a valid understanding of Allah. They might say, why did Allah do this to me? And that stems from an invalid understanding of their Lord. So we have to make an effort to purify our faith and to purify our iman and to make it have that quality of ikhlas in our faith and in our iman. So that's the first degree of ikhlas. And then the second degree of ikhlas relates to how we approach this religion and our practice of it. And that this is a subtle point, because ultimately, what is the purpose of Islam? Ultimately, the purpose of Islam is to guide you to your Lord and to connect you to Allah. Thus, if someone's practicing a form of Islam that's divorced from this reality, that's not connecting, they might be doing all the physical aspects, but if they're not connecting back to Allah and kind of practicing Islam in a nominal sense or kind of in a cultural sense, is that that's not ikhlas. Because true ikhlas is connecting you back to Allah, the essence of the religion. So ikhlas is something between you and Allah, and it's your personal relationship between you and Allah, and Islam is the means to facilitating that and to achieving that. So even in our approach to the religion, is that we have to have ikhlas in how we implement and approach this religion. And very importantly, is that you'll find people that, what's their approach to this religion? It's political. Right? They ultimately use the religion as a political platform for their own stances in the world. And if someone approaches their religion like that, that's not ikhlas. Because ikhlas has to do with you and Allah and drawing closer to Allah, which is the essence of the religion. It's not a political package. Right? And that's why, what does Allah say? إِنَّا أَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكَ الْكِتَابَ بِالْحَقِّ, is that we revealed the book to you in truth. فَاعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ, worship Allah, مُخْلِصًا لَهُ الدِّينَ, in pure ikhlas. Religion is purely for Him. مُخْلِصًا, in all of ibadah, all the acts of worship, purity for Him. And then a verse, قُلِ اللَّهَ أَعْبُدْ, say Allah, it is Allah who I worship, مُخْلِصًا لَهُ دِينِي, and that I make my approach to that, I make my religion, I make my deen completely pure and completely unadulterated in that regards. So again, another aspect, the second degree of ikhlas is how we approach this religion. Right? We can't have a Muslim in the mosque and then outside the mosque for something else. That's not ikhlas. And then finally, the third degree of ikhlas, which is usually what we tend to think about when we think about sincerity, is the ikhlas and niyyah. Is that the sincerity in our intention, or you can say the singularity of purpose. Is that, in other words, are we doing this for the sake of Allah, or do we have some other ulterior motives? And sometimes it's very subtle, that this is why we have to be careful. Someone might think they're doing something for the sake of Allah, but in reality, they have some ulterior motive. They're actually doing it for their own, perhaps self-gratification or some other motive. And that this is extremely important. And that again, this is the essence of our religion, is having ikhlas in every intention that we make, and having ikhlas in our beliefs, is having ikhlas in our approach to this religion. And that the Prophet, there's so many hadith and there's so many verses that pertain to this reality, is that the Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَنْظُرُ إِلَىٰ أَجْسَامِكُمْ وَلَا إِلَىٰ صُورِكُمْ, is that Allah does not look to your physicality, doesn't look to your bodies or your forms. Right? It doesn't matter your skin color, it doesn't matter where you come from. Allah doesn't look at those things. What does He look at? Where is the gaze of Allah? And the Prophet clarified, because the Prophet has authority to speak about these things. وَلَكِنْ يَنْظُرُ إِلَىٰ قُلُوبِكُمْ وَأَعْمَالِكُمْ, is that He looks towards your hearts and your actions. And your heart has to have ikhlas in your approach to the religion. And likewise your actions, we don't have actions if we don't have ikhlas. It's not even an action. If it's not ikhlas, if there's no sincerity behind the action, then it's not going to be accepted. And if it's not accepted, then again, what is it? It's an outward form with no reality. And then in the famous hadith that, Imam Nawawi starts his 40 hadith, and he starts his Riyadh al-Salihin, and Imam Bukhari starts his compilation with, is that we all know this hadith, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, is that actions are according to their intentions. وَإِنَّمَا لِكُلِّ امْرِئٍ مَا نَوَىٰ, and that everyone gets according to his action. That's the principle. And then the Prophet gives a case study. فَمَنْ كَانَتْ هِجْرَتُهُ إِلَى دُنْيَا يُصِيبُهَا أَوْ إِلَى إِمْرَأَةٍ يَنْكِحُهَا فَهِجْرَتُهُ إِلَى مَا هَاجَرَ إِلَيْهِ. So here's an example. As if someone migrates, they leave their comforts, they leave their homelands, they leave their houses, it was a hard action, they physically go from one place to another, they migrate, they come to America, right? Or they go somewhere else. And what is their purpose of that migration? Is that for some dunya that they can acquire. Or for somebody a spouse that they can marry, فَهِجْرَتُهُ إِلَى مَا هَاجَرَ إِلَيْهِ, is that all they get is for what they migrated to. As opposed to, if someone was to migrate for the sake of Allah and His Messenger, is that what will they get? Is that they will get Allah and His Messenger. Right? Another important hadith is that the Prophet ﷺ said, people will be resurrected on the Day of Judgment according to their intention. So we have to understand that ikhlas and sound intentions and good intentions, again, is the spirit and the basis and the essence of this deen. And that when we think of actions, we think, we're feeding people, we're doing this, we're establishing the masjid. We shouldn't be limited by the outward physical components of those actions, because really what's the essence, what's the root of those actions, is that it's the ikhlas. Right? And that's why they say that the intention is the seed. It's the badara. And then the action is the tree, it's the shajara. But then the reward of that action is the thamara, it's the fruit. Right? So we just kind of think about the tree, we also have to think about the seed. Right? What was before the tree and what's after the tree is the fruit. And when you plant a tree, you don't plant a tree for itself, you plant a tree to reap the fruit. So if someone wants to reap the fruit of their deeds, is that they have to make sure that they planted the seed correctly. You can't plant a seed in dead soil. You have to plant it in the correct soil. You have to make that. So if we want to be successful in whatever we're doing, we have to make sure that we're planting the correct seeds. And what are the correct seeds? That the correct seeds are our intentions and having sincerity in those intentions. And that's why our actions are good. What do our actions revolve upon? Our intentions. An action is deemed good or bad according to your intentions. Deemed beautiful or ugly according to the intention. It's deemed accepted, sound, unsound according to the intention. And that really the intentions, the sincerity is what gives value to that action. So someone might have, so many times small deeds are magnified by the intention. Something you might think is paltry, is that by that sincerity, it's not paltry in the sight of Allah, in the eyes of Allah. And vice versa, this is the scary part, is that there might be someone has huge good deeds and they're doing this and they're doing that, but because of the lack of intention, the lack of sincerity, the lack of ikhlas, is that that's minimized by their intention. Right? It could even become haba'an manthura, scattered dust on the Day of Judgment. Right? That's how Allah refers to the people whose deeds are not accepted on the Day of Judgment, is that their actions are just scattered dust. No value, no weight, no significance. And that we heard this term over and over, was that there was once an immoral lady in the time of the Bani Israel in the previous nations, and that she lived a life of sin. One day she was walking by and she saw a well, and there was a dog that was almost dying out of starvation, out of thirst, right? And she saw that, and she had compassion for that animal. And what did she do is that she took off her own slipper, her own shoe, and she filled it up with water, and she gave drink to that dog. And we know that she was accepted, and Allah forgave all her sins based on that small little deed. But she had that sincerity, she had that ikhlas. Is that again, with ikhlas, with sincerity, small deeds, there's no such thing. They're not even called small deeds if there's ikhlas and sincerity. Right? And that this is why this is so important. And one of the scholars, Imam al-Haddad, he says so beautifully, he says, you must therefore utter no word, do no action, or decide no matter without the intention of drawing nearer thereby to Allah and seeking the reward He has assigned through His beneficence and grace to the intended actions. So again, we have to have sincerity in all of our actions, and there's different degrees. So those actions that are obligatory upon us, it's obligatory to have sincerity in those actions. And then the door for intentions is open. Right? You can make the intention of eating, you can make a good intention, you have sincerity in that, you'll be accepted. Right? But the most important thing is that those obligations that Allah has imposed upon us, is that we have to have sincerity in those obligations and not have the opposite of sincerity, which is what? It's showing off, ostentation, and hypocrisy. And that this is actually extremely dangerous, because Allah says, because this is known as a type of shirk, is that we know how dangerous and how severe shirk, association with Allah, is in Islam. But the Prophet ﷺ, he likened showing off and being insincere and being hypocritical, he likened that to a type of shirk. Obviously it doesn't take you out of the fold of Islam, you're still Muslim, but it's a dangerous and sinful state. And that we know in the verse that Allah says, قُلْ إِنَّمَا أَنَا بَشْرٌ مِثْلُكُمْ يُوحَى إِلَيَّ أَنَّمَا إِلَهُكُمْ إِلَهٌ وَاحِدٌ. Is that say, that I am a man, and that like you all, and that like you, and that I receive revelation, and that my Lord is one, and that your Lord and my Lord is one. فَمَنْ كَانَ يَرْجُو لِقَاءَ رَبِّهِ, and that whoever hopes for the meeting of his Lord, فَلْيَعْمَلْ عَمَلًا صَالِحًا, is that he should act righteously, وَلَا يُشْرِكْ بِعِبَادَةِ رَبِّهِ أَحَدًا, and that he should not associate in his worship of his Lord anyone. And that there's another hadith, and these are really scary hadith. If we think about these should really frighten us. Is that Allah in this hadith, He says that أَنَا أَغْنَى الْأَغْنِيَاءَ عَنِ الشِّرْكِ, is that I am the most free of any needs of association. Allah doesn't need our worship, and He doesn't need us to associate anyone with Him. So of all partners, I am the most in need of no one. Anyone who performs a deed and associates a partner with me in it, then I leave him alone, as well as his partner. And Allah says to that person, seek your reward with that person that you showed off to. And that, again, going back to that principle, how great deeds are minimalized based on the lack of intention, is that one of the scariest hadith, and one of the companions, he traveled far distance to hear this hadith, And when he asked, I believe it was Abu Hurairah, about this hadith that he heard from the Prophet ﷺ, Abu Hurairah, he began to say this hadith, and then he actually fell unconscious. And then he got up again, and he tried to say it again, and he actually fell unconscious. And 3 times this happened, that he was so overwhelmed by this hadith, that he almost couldn't even say it. And this is how severe this hadith is, and we ask Allah for complete afiyah. May Allah protect us, and may Allah guide us protect us from these things. Is that the hadith that the Prophet ﷺ said, the first person who will enter the hellfire, even before people who associate things with Allah, who's the first people who will enter hellfire? Is that it's people, a scholar, a martyr, and someone who gives charity, someone who's charitable. And the scholar, the martyr comes, and he thinks that he has a reward with Allah, right? And Allah says, what did you do? And he says, oh Allah, I fought in your path, and I sacrificed, and I gave my wealth, and I even gave my life. And Allah says, you've lied. That's not true, you've lied. And Allah says, you only fought so that you can be called brave, and that you can be called, you could be honored in this world, and you could be called a martyr, and that you're brave, and you could be, right, your legacy is remembered. And that you got that, and you got that reward. That was what you wanted, you got it in the dunya. Is that now you have to enter the fire, because you didn't do it for the sake of Allah. And then Nasallahu Salama, a scholar, is called. And Allah says, what have you done in your life? He says, I learned, and I studied, and I taught. And then Allah says, you lied. Is that you learned, and you studied, and you taught, so people could point their finger at you and say, oh, he's a great scholar, and he's a very learned person, and you've got that reward, so now enter hell. And then again, someone who gives charity, and a philanthropist is brought forth, and he says, what did you do with your life? I gave charity here, I gave to this organization, this masjid, this and that. And Allah says, you've lied. Is that you give charity so people can say that you're a generous person, and that he's ordered to help. So, you know, this is ikhlas, this topic of ikhlas. Again, going back, it's from the essence of this deen, and it's from the most important matters of this deen, and something that should always be on our minds and always in our hearts, is that how can we improve, and how can we have this attribute and be qualified with ikhlas in everything that we're doing. So may Allah give us the tawfiq to actualize this ikhlas, and may Allah protect us and give us afiyah, and may Allah guard us from hypocrisy and insincerity and all these negative qualities, and may we be amongst the people of ikhlas, the mukhliseen, and the successful people in this world and the next. والله عز وجل يقول وبقول يهتدي المهتدين جل في علاه وإذا قرئ القرآن فاستمعوا له وأنصتوا لعلكم ترحمون وقال عز من قائل كريم فإذا قرأت القرآن فاستعذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان في خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله العظيم الكريم لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين من كل ذنب فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين ولا عدوان إلا على الظالمين وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وآله وصحبه وسلم تسليما. As we have seen the meanings of ikhlas and the degrees of sincerity and the importance and almost the severity of sincerity, the imperative of sincerity, is that the question should be is how do we acquire, how do we grow and develop this attribute of ikhlas, of sincerity. And that's a whole discussion in itself. It can be lessons, let alone a khutbah, let alone the remaining time that we have left. But there's a few practical items that we could perhaps take in the remaining time. Is that first of all, we have to realize how important this is. Is that we have to realize how essential this is. And we have to realize, like I said in the beginning, is that having sincerity in our actions and in our religion is from the essence of our religion. It's from the spirit of our religion. Again, like Ibn Ata'Allah said, he said that everything that we do physically, is like a lifeless body. It's like a dead body. No value, right? We bury bodies. what gives a body its value is that the life. So the sincerity is the spirit that gives our actions value. So the first thing, right, is realizing how important this is. And then the next thing is also realizing that it's not an easy task. It's not something that is necessarily easy. Inshallah, Allah makes it easy. But in of itself, it's not something that's easy. And that's why they asked one of the great Imams, Sahal bin Tustari, they said, what's the most difficult thing for the nafs, for the self? And he said, it's ikhlas, it's having sincerity. Why? Because if someone's truly mukhlis, if someone's truly sincere, the ego has no portion of that. Right? Most of the things that we do, if we think about it, is that we do it for ourselves, or for our families. Right? We have some personal motive in it. But the idea of ikhlas is that you're not even doing it for yourself. It's not for your own self-gratification. It's that you're doing that action for Allah. Right? You might have a feud with somebody. It might even be your parents. Is that forgive them for the sake of Allah. For Allah. Just forgive them. Forgive them for the sake of Allah. Someone did you wrong. Yourself, you want to say, I have to get revenge. I'll never forgive this person. For the sake of Allah, not for you. Forgive them. Right? That's the spirit of ikhlas. Is that it's not for you. It's not your own. And that's why it's very subtle. Because sometimes we might think we're doing something that's sincere, but really we have some alternative motive that relates to our own personal gratification, relates to our own personal self. That's why it's very subtle, very, very subtle. So subtle to some of the scholars they mention that from insincerity, someone might read something amazing in a book, right? They might read some amazing quote, and they want to memorize that quote, so next time they're with people, is that they can tell people that, I read this and it's so amazing, listen to this, and that they kind of show that they have this wisdom. Is that can even be from sincerity. So it's a very slippery slope, but at the same time, you know, we shouldn't say, I can never achieve this, and to have despair and be despondent. It's to make us have fear. It's to make us be vigilant, and to make us be conscious in our lives. And to never be complacent with ourselves. To never be complacent and pleased with ourselves. And if we have that, if we're not pleased with ourselves, that's what propels us forward. Right? If someone's complacent with themselves, they feel, I don't have anything to improve, they'll never improve. But only when you have something that you want to improve, that's when you improve. That's one of the wisdoms why Allah created an enemy within us, which is our own selves, is that enemy propels us to improvement. Because we have to struggle with it, and with that struggle there's a wisdom in that. So being vigilant and being fearful and being cautious. And that's why Allah says, وَالَّذِينَ يُؤْتُونَ مَا أَتَوْا وَقُلُوبُهُم وَجِلَةٌ أَنَّهُمْ إِلَىٰ رَبِّهِمْ رَاجِعُونَ. So Allah's talking about people who give charity, they're doing good deeds, but in their hearts they have fear. Right? And Aisha asked the Prophet, why did they have fear if they're doing good deeds? Because they have that fear of not being sincere, they have that fear of being rejected. And that's why one of the tabi'in, one of the successors, he says, I met 40 of the companions, and not one of them thought they were safe from hypocrisy. So that's one point that we have to keep in mind. The next point is that we have to make an effort for it. And part of that effort is asking Allah for tawfiq and asking Allah for betterment. And part of that effort is doing things in private. Right? And that's why they say is that this person who's truly sincere, his actions in private are better than his actions in public. And we live in an age where everything's publicized. Is that someone does a good, simple action and they put it on Facebook and everyone's commenting, and where is the sincerity with Allah? I'm not saying that that's not sincere, that can be very sincere. But it's susceptible to insincerity. Because you want people what do you want? So we have to ask ourselves, what do we want when we do things like that? Do we want people to praise us? Do we want to be acknowledged? If that's the case, then that's antithetical to sincerity. So we should try to make an effort that at least some of our actions, no one but Allah knows about them. In hopes that we acquire that sincerity. And also, getting to the essence of it, is that we should be mindful of Allah. Is that we should be conscious of Allah, that Allah, He knows our inner thoughts. Is that we're completely vulnerable, completely transparent, completely exposed before Allah, and we have to make this a reality in our heart. Because if someone was with you, actually they did studies about this, is that when they have mirrors in rooms, is that people actually act better than when they don't have mirrors. And they did one study on Halloween where they had kids come in, and there was one room, there was candy, and they said you can only take one piece of candy. And one of the rooms had different types of candies, and there was no mirror. And the kids, some of them took a lot more, and some of them took one. But then they did another study where they same room, but they put a big mirror facing them. No one was behind it, just put a big mirror facing them. And it turns out that a lot of those children, just because of that presence of the mirror, self-awareness, is that they only took one piece of candy. So if that's just being self-aware with yourself, then the believer should have self-awareness. He should have awareness of his Lord. Is that we know that Allah is always watching us, and before we make any decision, we should call that reality to heart. These are things that need to be reinforced over and over. Is that we should say that we have an appointment with Allah. Is that we will meet Allah, and that we will present our case before Allah. And there's nothing we hide before Allah. So if we just have that reality, and that's ihsan. That's what the Prophet said, is that you worship Allah as if you see Him. And if you don't see Him, if you haven't reached that state, then you know full well that He sees you. Being conscious of that reality, and that's the essence of Islam, is that we have these realities, these meanings. Right? If we don't have these meanings, then what do we have? Right? So those are some practical steps, and again, that's a whole different, that can be, put into classes and hours long, but we have to make the effort, and we have to ask Allah for tawfiq. And another last point that I'll end with is that we should never underestimate the power of sincerity. We should never underestimate the effect of sincerity. And it could be with anybody. It can be with a child. It could be with a teenager. Is that if they have that sincerity, Allahu Akbar, things can open up that you never imagined. And that's why when you think about the blessed Prophet Jesus, where does his story start? Does it start with him? Does it start with his mother? Actually, it starts before that. And it starts with the intention of his grandmother, Hannah. Right? And that's why Allah in Surah Al-Imran, which deals with this topic, is that Allah says, when the wife of Imran, Hannah, said, "My Lord, indeed I have pledged to you," she made that intention, she had ikhlas in the intention, that what is in my womb is solely for your service. So accept this from me, indeed, and she was conscious of that reality, indeed you are the hearing, the all-knowing, and that the rest is history. The rest is history. So may Allah give us tawfiq and accept us and make us amongst those who are sincere in everything that we do, that we say, that we decide, our choices, our intentions. And may Allah let us grow in sincerity and not be amongst the people who don't have sincerity and have hypocrisy. وَاعْلَمُوا يَا عِبَادَ اللَّهِ أَنَّ اللَّهَ أَمَرَنَا بِأَمْرٍ بَدَأَ فِي بِنَفْسِهِ فقال إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد عبدك ورسولك النبي الأمي وعلى آل سيدنا محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم وبارك على سيدنا محمد عبدك ورسولك النبي الأمي وعلى آل سيدنا محمد كما باركت على سيدنا إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد اللهم اعز الإسلام وانصر المسلمين اللهم اعز الإسلام وانصر المسلمين اللهم اعز الإسلام وانصر المسلمين اللهم كن إخواننا المسلمين في مشارق الأرض ومغاربها اللهم اغفر لنا وللمسلمين والمسلمات والمؤمنين والمؤمنات الأحياء منهم والأموات مغفرة ظاهرة وباطنة سرا وعلانية لا تغادر لنا ذنبا ولا نكتسب بعدها خطيئة ولا إثما إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون اذكروا الله العظيم يذكركم واشكروه على نعمه يزدكم ولذكر الله أكبر